I should have known something was wrong the moment Deborah Patterson showed up at my door with that manila folder and her trademark condescending smile. But I was too busy unloading lumber from my truck to care about whatever nonsense the HOA president wanted this time. My name is Harrison Young, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Buffalo, New York, for about 3 years at that point. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments built in the early 2000s, with houses that all looked vaguely similar, despite the builder's insistence that there were 5 different floor plans. I had bought my place after my divorce, looking for a fresh start and somewhere quiet where I could focus on my woodworking business. The HOA seemed reasonable enough when I moved in, mostly concerned with making sure people mowed their lawns and did not paint their houses bizarre colors. That changed when Deborah took over as president about 18 months ago. She was the stereotypical HOA tyrant, a woman in her late 40s with an angular bob haircut that somehow made her look even more severe, and she treated the neighborhood covenants like they were biblical commandments handed down from on high. Every month brought some new crusade, whether it was the acceptable height of mailbox posts or the precise shade of white allowed for vinyl fencing. "Harrison, we need to talk," she announced, not waiting for an invitation before marching up my driveway. It was early October, and the weather forecasters were already predicting a harsh winter. I had been preparing accordingly, stocking up on firewood and making sure my backup generator was in good working order. "What's up, Deborah?" I wiped the sawdust off my hands and tried to look patient. My golden retriever, Murphy, wandered over to investigate, but even he seemed to sense the tension and kept his distance from her. She opened the folder with a theatrical flourish that would have been funny if I had not known what was coming. "The board conducted an inspection of properties this week, and we noticed several violations. Yours included." Violations? I had just pressure washed my house. My lawn was immaculate. I paid my dues on time every quarter. "What are you talking about, your garage?" She pulled out a photograph that she must have taken by standing on her tiptoes and angling her phone through the window at the top of my garage door. The invasion of privacy alone should have set off alarm bells, but I was too surprised by the accusation to process that yet. "You're storing a generator in there. That's a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the updated covenants." I stared at her. "What updated covenants? I never got any notice about changes." "The board voted on amendments last month." Notice was posted on the community website for the required 30 days. Her smile was thin and victorious, like a cat that had just cornered a mouse. "Nobody uses that website, Deborah. You know that. The login never works, and half the neighborhood doesn't even know it exists." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "And why would generators be banned anyway? We live in Buffalo. We get nor'easters, power outages. That generator isn't just convenient, it's a safety issue." "The board has determined that storing fuel and combustion engines in attached garages presents a fire hazard and reduces property values. You have 30 days to remove it or face fines of $200 per day." The absurdity of it hit me like a physical blow. A fire hazard. It's a properly maintained Generac generator that I use maybe twice a year. I store the gas in approved containers. Everything is up to code. HOA covenants supersede local codes when they're more restrictive, she said, reciting what was clearly a prepared line. "This isn't negotiable, Harrison. The rule applies to everyone." "Does everyone even have a generator?" I knew the answer. Most people in the neighborhood did not bother with backup power. When the electricity went out, they just went to a hotel or suffered through it with flashlights and cold meals. "That's irrelevant." The rule is the rule. She tucked the folder under her arm. 30 days. I suggest you find alternative storage, perhaps a shed in the backyard, though you'll need to submit plans for board approval first, and those take 60 to 90 days to process. She walked away before I could argue further, her heels clicking on the concrete with the sharp precision of a judge's gavel. Murphy whined softly, pressing his nose against my hand. Even the dog knew this was bullshit. That evening, I started making calls. First to my neighbor, Tom Hendricks, who lived 2 doors down and was one of the few reasonable people in the subdivision. He worked as an electrician and had his own backup generator. "Yeah, I got the same visit," he said when I told him what happened. "Complete garbage." I tried to fight it, but apparently they've got some lawyer who helped them word everything so it's technically legal. The covenants allow them to make amendments with just a board vote as long as they post notice somewhere. Doesn't matter if anyone actually sees it. That can't be right. Don't they need homeowner approval? You'd think. I called a real estate attorney, and she said unless we can prove the amendments are arbitrary or discriminatory, we're stuck with them. Fighting it would cost thousands in legal fees, and there's no guarantee we'd win. Tom sounded as frustrated as I felt. "I'm moving my generator to my brother's place for now. Can't afford those daily fines." After I hung up, I did my own research. Tom was right. The covenants we had all signed when purchasing our homes gave the board broad authority to make changes. The only real recourse was to get enough homeowners together to vote out the current board. But that required organizing a special election and getting a quorum of the neighborhood to participate. In a community where most people could barely be bothered to attend the annual meeting, that seemed impossible. Still, I was not about to roll over. I spent the next week going door to door, talking to neighbors about the generator ban. The responses ranged from apathetic to supportive, but nobody wanted to stick their neck out. Mrs. Chen on Maple Drive sympathized but said she was already on Deborah's bad side over a garden gnome dispute and could not risk more trouble. The Johnsons had just had a baby and did not have time for HOA politics. The Ramirez family was dealing with a medical emergency and barely registered what I was saying. By the end of the week, I had to face reality. I was on my own. The smart move would have been to comply. Move the generator, pay for a shed, wait out the bureaucratic process. But something about Deborah's smug certainty, her absolute conviction that she could dictate what I did with my own property, stuck in my craw. I had bought this house. I paid the mortgage. I maintained it. And now some power-hungry HOA president with too much time on her hands was going to fine me $200 a day over safety equipment. I made my decision on a Thursday night in mid-October. The generator was staying in my garage. If they wanted to fine me, they could try. I would document everything, keep records, and if it came down to it, I would take them to court. It would be expensive and time-consuming, but the principle mattered. The first fine notice arrived exactly 30 days after Deborah's visit, delivered by certified mail. $200, with a breakdown of the violation and a reminder that fines would continue to accrue daily until compliance was achieved. I filed it in a folder I had started specifically for HOA documentation and went about my business. November came with the first real cold snap. The weather forecasters started making noise about an unusually active winter storm pattern setting up over the Great Lakes. I continued with my preparations, making sure I had extra propane for my camping stove, batteries, flashlights, and enough non-perishable food to last a couple weeks if necessary. The generator sat in my garage, connected to my transfer switch, ready to go at a moment's notice. The fine notices kept coming. After 2 weeks, Deborah herself showed up again, this time with another board member, a nervous-looking guy named Richard something who I had seen at exactly one HOA meeting. "Harrison, you're at $2,800 in fines now," Deborah said without preamble. "This is your final warning before we pursue legal action. We can place a lien on your property. Do what you need to do, Deborah." I was working in my garage workshop, putting the finishing touches on a custom bookshelf for a client. I did not even look up from the sanding I was doing. "I've documented everything. Every photo you took through my garage window without permission. Every fine notice. When this goes in front of a judge, we'll see how well your little amendment holds up, especially when I point out the safety implications." Her face flushed red. "You can't just ignore the rules because you don't like them. And you can't make up rules that put people in danger just because you're on a power trip." I finally looked at her directly. "What happens when we get a major storm, Deborah? When the power goes out for days? You going to take responsibility for that?" "The power company has an excellent response time," she said stiffly. "Tell that to the people who froze in 2022 when that ice storm knocked out electricity for a week." I went back to my sanding. "We're done here. Send me whatever paperwork you want. I'll see you in court." Richard looked like he wanted to say something, but Deborah grabbed his arm and hauled him back down the driveway. I could hear her ranting even after they reached the sidewalk, something about entitled homeowners and setting examples. Tom stopped by that evening with a six-pack of beer and a worried expression. "Man, I heard Deborah over at the Hoffman's place going off about you. She's really got it out for you now. Let her." I took one of the beers he offered and leaned against my kitchen counter. Murphy was sprawled on his bed in the corner, snoring softly. "I'm not backing down on this. The whole thing is ridiculous." "I know, but she's not going to let it go either. She'll make your life hell." "She's welcome to try." I took a long drink. "You get your generator situation figured out." "Yeah, it's at my brother's place over in Amherst. Pain in the ass to get to if I need it, but whatever." Tom shook his head. "I still think you should just comply. This isn't worth the stress." "Maybe not, but someone has to push back." We talked for a while longer, mostly about safer topics like work and football. After Tom left, I sat in my living room and pulled up the extended weather forecast on my laptop. The meteorologists were getting increasingly concerned about a major winter storm system that was developing. It was still too far out to predict with certainty, but the models were starting to converge on something significant hitting western New York in early December. I made a note to stock up on extra fuel for the generator. November dragged on with steadily worsening weather. We got our first real snow on the 15th, about 6 inches that caught people off guard and turned the morning commute into chaos. The HOA sent out a reminder about snow removal requirements, threatening fines for anyone who did not clear their sidewalks within 24 hours of snowfall. I shoveled mine that evening, watching Deborah patrol the neighborhood like she was inspecting troops. The fine notices continued. By Thanksgiving, I was supposedly up to over $8,000 in penalties. The whole thing would have been funny if it was not so infuriating. I consulted with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Reeves who specialized in property law. She listened to my story, reviewed the documentation I had put together, and gave me a measured assessment. "They're within their legal rights to enforce the covenants as written," she said, "but you've got some good arguments about reasonableness and public safety. If they actually try to place a lien or take you to court, we can fight it. It'll cost you, though. I'd estimate $10,000 to $15,000 in legal fees, maybe more if it drags out." "More than the fines," I said, "probably. But if you win, you might be able to recover some of that, and it would set a precedent that could help your neighbors." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "The real question is whether you want to be the test case. HOAs bank on people not fighting back because it's expensive and exhausting. What do you think my chances are? In front of a judge, maybe 60-40 in your favor. The safety argument is strong, especially with winter storms being such a known risk in Buffalo, but HOAs get a lot of deference in covenant enforcement. Could go either way. She leaned back in her chair. My advice, wait and see if they actually follow through with the lien. A lot of times these things are just bluster. They might back down if you keep pushing back. I left her office feeling slightly better, but not much. At least I had a plan if things escalated further. December arrived with a vengeance. The first week brought temperatures that plunged into the teens, and the lake effect snow started in earnest. We got 8 inches on the 2nd, another 4 on the 4th, and then a relative break that let everyone dig out and catch their breath. That was when the weather forecasts got serious. A massive winter storm system was forming, pulling moisture from the Great Lakes and combining with an Arctic air mass dropping down from Canada. The meteorologists started using words like historic and potentially catastrophic. The storm was expected to hit Buffalo and the surrounding areas on December 12th and last for at least 36 hours, possibly longer. The grocery stores got slammed as people rushed to stock up. I already had everything I needed, but I topped off my generator fuel and made sure I had extra oil. I brought in extra firewood and stacked it in the garage where it would stay dry. I charged every battery I owned and filled my bathtub with water in case the pipes froze. The day before the storm hit, I ran into Deborah at the hardware store. She was loading bags of salt into her cart with a frantic energy that suggested she had not prepared as thoroughly as she should have. When she saw me, her expression curdled. "This doesn't change anything," she said without prompting. "The fines stand." "Sure, Deborah, stay warm." I pushed past her with the extra propane tanks I had just purchased. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" She followed me toward the checkout. "You think you're better than everyone else, that the rules don't apply to you." I stopped and turned to face her. "I think I'm a homeowner who made responsible preparations for predictable weather events, and I think you're someone who banned those preparations because you enjoy having power over other people. That's what I think." "I'll see you in court," she hissed, looking forward to it. The storm hit on schedule, rolling in around noon on December 12th. The snow started gradually, big lazy flakes that seemed innocent enough, but within an hour it had intensified into a full whiteout. The wind picked up, howling around the houses and creating drifts that swallowed mailboxes and cars. I stood at my living room window and watched the neighborhood disappear into a wall of white. By evening, we had already accumulated over a foot of snow, and it showed no signs of stopping. The temperature had dropped to 5 degrees, with wind chills well below zero. My heat was running constantly, trying to keep up with the cold that seemed to seep through every crack and gap in the house's envelope. The power went out at 8:30 p.m. One moment, I was watching the news coverage of the storm, and the next everything went dark and silent except for the wind. I waited a few seconds to see if it would come back on its own, then grabbed my flashlight and headed for the garage. The generator started on the second pull, rumbling to life with a reassuring mechanical growl. I let it warm up for a minute, then threw the transfer switch. Lights flickered back on in the house, the refrigerator hummed back to life, and the furnace kicked on with its familiar whoosh. Within 10 minutes, it was like the outage had never happened. I made myself dinner, checked on Murphy, and settled in to wait out the storm. The news on my laptop, running off the Wi-Fi that was running off my generator, said the power company was reporting over 100,000 customers without electricity, and warned that restoration could take days given the severity of the conditions. Around 10 p.m., someone knocked on my door. I peered through the peephole and saw Tom, bundled up like he was heading for an Arctic expedition. "Thank God," he said when I opened the door. "Can we crash here? Our power is out and the house is already getting cold." "Of course. Get in here." I helped him carry in his wife, Linda, and their 2 kids, along with an armload of blankets and a bag of what looked like snacks and medications. "Guest room is upstairs, and there's another bedroom the kids can use." "You're a lifesaver, man, seriously." Tom looked exhausted. "It's already down to 55 in our place, and with the wind it's dropping fast." "How long has your power been out?" "Since about 8. Same as everyone, I think. I called the power company, and they said it could be 72 hours or more before they get to our area." Linda got the kids settled upstairs while Tom and I stood in the kitchen. He looked at the lights, the humming refrigerator, the general sense of normalcy, and shook his head. "I should have kept my generator. This is insane." Deborah made her choice. Everyone else went along with it. "Now we deal with the consequences." I poured him a cup of coffee from the pot I had just brewed. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "Thanks, really." The knocking started about an hour later. First it was the Hendersons from across the street, an elderly couple who looked half frozen even though they had only walked 50 yards through the storm. Then it was the Williams family from down the block, with 3 teenagers and a yapping chihuahua. Then Mrs. Chen, apologetic and shivering. I let them all in. My house was not huge, but it had 3 bedrooms and a finished basement. People could share spaces, camp out on couches, whatever worked. The important thing was that it was warm and safe, which was more than could be said for their own homes at the moment. By midnight, I had 14 people sheltering in my house. The generator was handling the load like a champ, and I had enough fuel to keep it running for at least 3 or 4 days if I was careful. We set up a rotating schedule for the bathrooms, organized the food everyone had brought to contribute, and tried to make the best of an increasingly surreal situation. Tom found me in the garage around 1 a.m., checking the generator's oil level and fuel gauge. "You know half the neighborhood is going to hear about this by morning," he said, "probably. Deborah's going to lose her mind. Also probably." I wiped my hands on a rag. "Let her. Everyone in this house right now is safe and warm, that's what matters. You're making her look really bad." She made herself look bad when she banned generators in the middle of winter. I closed the garage door against the wind that had picked up even more if that was possible. "I'm not doing this to score points, Tom. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. I know, just warning you." The storm continued through the night and into the next day. When dawn finally came, it revealed a neighborhood transformed into something from a disaster movie. Snow drifts were 6 and 7 feet high in places. Cars were completely buried. Power lines were down in several spots, draped across yards like broken spiderweb strands. Nothing was moving on the roads. Even the main streets were impassable. My house guests took turns looking out the windows in amazement. The kids, at least, thought it was exciting once they got over the initial fear. They built blanket forts in the basement and played board games. The adults were more subdued, checking their phones obsessively for updates from the power company and calling relatives to let them know they were safe. The second knock came around 10 a.m. on December 13th. I was helping Linda make sandwiches for lunch when I heard it, and for a moment I wondered who else could possibly need shelter at this point. Then I opened the door and found Deborah Patterson standing on my porch, looking like she had just climbed Mount Everest. She was wearing a winter coat that was clearly not designed for this kind of weather, and her face was red and chapped from the cold. Snow caked her boots and the bottom of her pants. Behind her, the neighborhood was still locked in the storm's grip, though the snow had finally stopped falling. "I need your help," she said without preamble. I stared at her for a long moment. "Excuse me, my power is out. The house is freezing. I have nowhere else to go." She was shivering violently, her teeth practically chattering. "Please." Every instinct I had screamed at me to slam the door in her face. This woman had spent months making my life difficult over a generator ban that was now directly responsible for her current suffering. She had threatened me with fines, with liens, with legal action. She had gone out of her way to be vindictive and petty. And she was going to freeze to death if I turned her away. "Come inside," I said, stepping back. She practically fell through the door, and I caught her before she could collapse. She was colder than I had realized, her movements sluggish in a way that suggested early hypothermia. I guided her to the living room and sat her down near the heating vent, then grabbed blankets to wrap around her. "When did your power go out?" I asked. "Yesterday evening, same as everyone." Her voice was thin and weak. "I thought it would come back on. I waited. It got so cold." "Why didn't you come here sooner?" She did not answer, but the look on her face told me everything. Pride, embarrassment, the sheer inability to admit that she had been wrong and I had been right. She had literally risked her life rather than come to me for help earlier. Linda appeared with hot coffee, and I helped Deborah hold the mug since her hands were shaking too badly to grip it herself. Gradually, the color started to return to her face. She drank the coffee slowly, and I could practically see her thinking through what came next. "Thank you," she finally said, the words clearly costing her something. "You're welcome. I suppose you think this proves your point." There was a defensive edge to her voice now that she was warming up and feeling more like herself. "I don't think anything except that everyone in this neighborhood should have the option to keep backup power in their garage without being fined into oblivion." I sat down across from her. "People could have died, Deborah. Still might if the power doesn't come back soon. All because you decided generators were a threat to property values." "The board made that decision," she protested. "It wasn't just me. You led the charge. You're the president. Own it." I was not angry, just tired. "How many other people in the neighborhood are in trouble right now because they don't have heat?" She looked away. "I don't know. Several, probably. The phone lines are down. I haven't been able to reach anyone." Tom came down the stairs at that moment and stopped dead when he saw Deborah. "You've got to be kidding me." "She needed help," I said simply. "After everything she's done, after the fines, after she literally banned the thing that's keeping us alive right now." Tom looked furious. "She should be groveling." "Tom," Linda said quietly from the kitchen doorway. She gave him a look that clearly meant not now. He threw up his hands and stalked off toward the basement, muttering under his breath. I could not entirely blame him for the reaction. Deborah wrapped the blankets tighter around herself. "I should go." "You're staying until you're fully warmed up and the storm passes," I said firmly. "I'm not sending anyone back out into that mess, but we need to talk about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean there are probably people in this neighborhood who are in real danger right now. Elderly folks who can't get to help, families with small kids, and you're the HOA president. You have a responsibility to them whether you want to admit it or not." She was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" "Help me figure out who needs help. Once the weather clears enough to move around safely, we need to do wellness checks. Make sure everyone is okay." I leaned forward. "And when this is over, we need to reverse that generator ban immediately. No debate, no discussion. It was a mistake that could have gotten people killed." "The board would need to vote on that," she said automatically. "Then call a board meeting. Do whatever you have to do, because if you don't, I'm going to make sure every single person in this neighborhood knows exactly what happened here and whose fault it was." Her face went through several emotions at once: anger, shame, fear, and finally a kind of exhausted resignation. "Fine, I'll call for a vote to reverse the ban." "Good." I stood up. "Now drink your coffee and warm up. We've got work to do once this storm passes." The snow finally stopped around noon, though the wind continued for several more hours. By evening, it was calm enough to venture outside, and I pulled on my winter gear to do a reconnaissance of the neighborhood. Tom volunteered to come with me, still radiating hostility toward Deborah but willing to help check on people. We trudged through waist-deep snow in places, using the buried mailboxes as landmarks to figure out which house was which. The first house we checked was the Hoffmans, and we found them huddled in their living room wearing every piece of clothing they owned. Their power was still out, and the interior temperature had dropped to the low 40s. We brought them back to my place. The Ramirez family was in similar shape. So were the Johnsons, though they had managed slightly better by all sleeping in one bedroom to concentrate body heat. We gathered everyone we could find and brought them back to my house, which was quickly starting to resemble a disaster shelter. By nightfall on December 13th, I had 23 people crammed into my home. The generator was working overtime, and I was going through fuel faster than I had anticipated, but we were managing. I set up a rotation for cooking duties, bathroom access, and sleeping arrangements. It was chaotic and cramped, but everyone was safe. Deborah, to her credit, actually helped. She organized the kids into activity groups to keep them occupied, helped prepare meals, and made herself useful. It did not erase what she had done, but it was something. The power came back on in stages over the next 2 days. Parts of the neighborhood got electricity on December 14th, though my street and several others remained dark. The power company was working around the clock, but the damage was extensive. Crews had to clear fallen trees, replace downed lines, and repair damaged transformers. My house was one of the last to get power back, ironically enough. When the lights flickered on at 8 p.m. on December 15th, everyone cheered. I shut down the generator, which had been running continuously for over 72 hours, and felt a wave of relief that it had held up. People started heading home, thanking me profusely as they gathered their belongings. Tom clapped me on the shoulder and told me he owed me big time. Mrs. Chen cried and hugged me. Even the teenagers, who had spent most of the time glued to their phones, thanked me awkwardly. Deborah was one of the last to leave. She stood in my doorway, looking uncertain in a way I had never seen before. "I meant what I said," she told me. "I'll call for a board vote to reverse the generator ban. Emergency meeting next week. See that you do." I was too exhausted for speeches. "And Deborah, the fines. Those need to go away too." "I'll propose that as well," she paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I was wrong." It was not enough, not really, but it was a start. Just make sure it doesn't happen again. She nodded and left, trudging through the snow toward her own house down the street. I closed the door and looked at the disaster that was my living room. Blankets everywhere, dishes piled in the sink, Murphy looking as exhausted as I felt. "We made it, buddy," I told the dog. He wagged his tail weakly and went back to sleep. The emergency HOA meeting happened on December 20th, held virtually since nobody wanted to venture out unless absolutely necessary. The Buffalo area was still digging out from the storm, which had officially been declared a federal disaster. The final totals were staggering: over 30 inches of snow in some areas, wind chills that had hit 40 below zero, and power outages that had affected more than 200,000 customers at the peak. I logged into the meeting from my laptop, watching the little tiles of faces pop up on the screen. Deborah looked haggard, and the other board members looked uncomfortable. Richard, the nervous guy who had come with Deborah to threaten me, could not seem to make eye contact with his camera. "Thank you everyone for joining on short notice," Deborah began, reading from prepared notes. "As you all know, we experienced a significant weather event last week that caused widespread power outages and serious hardship for many residents. In light of this, the board has been reevaluating certain covenant amendments that may have contributed to safety concerns." She went on for a few more minutes, using careful legal language that I suspected her attorney had helped draft. The gist of it was that the board was proposing to immediately rescind the generator ban and to void all related fines that had been assessed. It would require a vote, and she opened the floor for discussion. The floodgates opened. People who I had never heard speak at an HOA meeting suddenly had a lot to say. Tom gave an impassioned speech about the importance of emergency preparedness. Mrs. Chen talked about her elderly mother who lived with her and how terrified she had been when the power went out. One of the Johnsons described their infant daughter's pediatrician, warning them about the dangers of extreme cold exposure for babies. Several people brought up my name specifically, talking about how I had taken in neighbors and kept them safe. A few pointed out that my generator had literally saved lives. One person suggested that maybe the HOA should be encouraging backup power systems instead of banning them. Through it all, Deborah sat quietly, taking the criticism with a stoic expression that must have been killing her inside. When the discussion finally wound down, she called for the vote. The motion to rescind the generator ban passed unanimously. Every single board member voted in favor, probably aware that doing anything else would have been political suicide at that point. The motion to void all existing fines related to the ban also passed, though Richard abstained. When asked why, he mumbled something about setting precedents, but Deborah cut him off and confirmed that all fines were officially canceled. "Is there any other business?" Deborah asked, clearly ready to end the meeting. "Actually, yes." I unmuted myself. "I think we need to talk about how covenant amendments are handled going forward. The way the generator ban was implemented, with minimal notice and no real input from homeowners, that's a problem. We need a better process." There was a murmur of agreement from the other attendees. Deborah looked like she had been expecting this but had hoped it would not come up. "What are you proposing?" she asked carefully. "Amendments that affect safety or require significant expense to comply with should require a full homeowner vote, not just a board decision. And notices need to be sent by mail or email, not just posted on a website nobody uses. Real notice that people will actually see." I had thought about this a lot over the past few days. We need transparency and accountability. "I'll second that," Tom said immediately. The discussion went on for another 30 minutes, and by the end, we had hammered out a rough framework. Any covenant amendment that related to safety, structural changes to homes, or potential fines over a certain threshold would require a vote by the full membership of the HOA. Notices would be sent by mail with at least 60 days for review and comment. The board could still handle routine matters, but the big stuff would need broader approval. Deborah agreed to draft a formal proposal incorporating these changes and send it out for review. She looked defeated but resigned, like someone who knew they had lost the argument and was trying to salvage what dignity they could. The meeting adjourned, and I closed my laptop feeling cautiously optimistic. It was not a total victory, but it was progress. Christmas came and went quietly. The neighborhood was still recovering from the storm, and most people were focused on repairs and cleanup rather than elaborate celebrations. I spent the day with Murphy, working in my shop and enjoying the peace. A few days after Christmas, a package arrived on my doorstep. Inside was a fruit basket, the expensive kind from one of those gourmet companies, along with a card signed by most of my neighbors. The message thanked me for my help during the storm and included several gift cards to local restaurants. I was not the kind of person who needed recognition for doing the right thing, but I had to admit it felt good to be appreciated. I put the fruit basket in the kitchen and sent a group email thanking everyone for the gesture. The new year arrived with more snow, but nothing approaching the severity of the December storm. The power stayed on, and life gradually returned to normal. The formal proposal for HOA governance changes went out in mid-January, and a vote was scheduled for February. I used the time to keep building my case documentation, just in case. I had learned not to trust that everything would work out just because people said the right things. Patricia Reeves, my attorney, had taught me that much, but I was hopeful. The vote happened on February 15th, conducted by mail and ballot to ensure everyone had a chance to participate. The results were overwhelming. The new governance procedures passed with over 80% approval. A few people voted against it, probably Deborah loyalists or folks who just hated change on principle, but the mandate was clear. 2 weeks later, Deborah announced she would not be seeking re-election as HOA president when her term expired in May. She framed it as wanting to spend more time with family, but everyone knew the real reason. She had lost the confidence of the neighborhood, and staying on would have been pointless. Tom ran for president and won easily. His first act was to propose that the HOA establish an emergency preparedness committee to help educate residents about disaster planning and backup power options. It passed without debate. I declined to join the committee, having had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime, but I did agree to serve as an informal consultant. If people had questions about generators or emergency supplies, they could call me. That felt like the right level of involvement. Spring arrived with the usual mix of rain and mud and the slow greening of lawns. I spent my time working on custom furniture orders, which had picked up significantly after a local magazine did a feature on my business. Murphy and I went for long walks, and I started dating someone I met at a coffee shop, a teacher named Rachel who laughed at my HOA war stories and thought I was being modest when I downplayed my role in the whole thing. On a warm day in May, I was working in my garage with the door open when a car pulled up. I recognized Richard, the former board member, getting out with a sheepish expression. "Harrison, you got a minute?" he called. I set down my sander and walked over. "What's up?" I wanted to apologize for the way I went along with Deborah on the generator thing. I knew it was a bad idea, but I didn't have the spine to stand up to her. He looked genuinely remorseful. "You could have died out there helping everyone, or people could have died if you weren't there. All because I was too chicken shit to do the right thing." "You voted to rescind the ban," I pointed out, "after it almost killed people. That's not exactly heroic." He shook his head. "Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You were right, and I should have backed you up from the start." "I appreciate that." I meant it. For what it's worth, standing up to someone like Deborah isn't easy. She's got a strong personality. "That's putting it mildly," he smiled weakly. "So we're good." He left, and I went back to my work. Murphy came over to investigate, sniffing at the sawdust, and I scratched behind his ears. "Just another day in the neighborhood," I told him. He wagged his tail in agreement. Life moved on. The generator stayed in my garage right where it belonged, and nobody said a word about it. I kept it maintained and ready, hoping I would never need it again, but knowing that living in Buffalo meant I probably would eventually. Tom proved to be a competent HOA president, focused on practical issues like road maintenance and snow removal contracts rather than petty crusades. The Emergency Preparedness Committee organized a neighborhood workshop on disaster planning, and several families ended up purchasing their own generators after learning about the options. Deborah kept a low profile. I would see her occasionally at the grocery store or driving past in her car, and we would exchange polite nods but nothing more. I heard through the grapevine that she had gotten involved in her church's charitable programs, which seemed like a better outlet for her organizational energy than terrorizing homeowners. In late summer, the local news did a retrospective on the December blizzard, which meteorologists were calling one of the worst winter storms to hit western New York in decades. Several people from my neighborhood were interviewed, including Tom and Mrs. Chen. They talked about the importance of community and being prepared for emergencies. A reporter called me and asked if I would be willing to talk on camera about my experience. I declined politely, saying I had just done what anyone would do. She pressed a bit, saying that people were calling me a hero, but I shut that down quickly. Heroes ran into burning buildings or pulled people from car crashes. I had just kept my generator running and opened my door to neighbors who needed help. That was not heroism. That was basic human decency. But I did agree to a brief phone interview, where I stressed the importance of having backup power in areas prone to severe weather. The reporter seemed satisfied with that, and the story ran with a clip of my house, and a mention of how one resident's preparation had helped save lives during the crisis. Rachel thought it was sweet that I was downplaying my role. "You literally kept 24 people from freezing to death," she said over dinner one night. "That's kind of a big deal." "Anyone with a generator would have done the same thing," I insisted. "But most people didn't have generators because of the HOA ban, which you fought against." "So really, you saved people twice. Once by refusing to give up your generator and once by letting them shelter with you." I had not thought about it that way, but I suppose she had a point. Autumn arrived with gorgeous displays of color as the trees turned red and gold. Halloween came and went with kids' trick or treating up and down the streets. Thanksgiving brought Rachel's family to my place for dinner, which was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. December 12th rolled around again, the anniversary of the blizzard. The weather was cold but clear, with no major storms on the horizon. I spent part of the day going through my emergency supplies, making sure everything was still good and that my generator was in top shape. Tom stopped by that evening with a bottle of whiskey, and we sat in my kitchen reminiscing about the insanity of the previous year. "Can you believe it's been a year?" he said, pouring us both generous glasses. "Feels like a lifetime ago." "And feels like yesterday," I added. "I still think about how close things came to going really bad, but they didn't because you were stubborn enough to keep your generator." Tom raised his glass. "To being stubborn. To being prepared," I countered, clinking my glass against his. We drank and talked until late, eventually moving on to lighter topics. When Tom finally left, I stood on my porch and looked out at the neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows. A few houses had early Christmas decorations up already. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. It was peaceful and normal and exactly what I had wanted when I moved here 3 years ago. The HOA drama felt like a distant memory, something that had happened to someone else, but my generator was still in the garage, properly maintained and ready to go, just in case. Because you never knew when the next storm might hit, and when it did, I would be ready. And this time, hopefully, I would not be the only one. The following spring, something unexpected happened. I got a letter from the County Emergency Management Office asking if I would be willing to participate in a community preparedness program they were developing. Apparently, word had spread about what happened during the blizzard, and they wanted to use my neighborhood as a model for how communities could support each other during disasters. I agreed, mainly because it seemed like a good cause. The program involved training volunteer block captains who would help coordinate responses during emergencies, checking on vulnerable residents and sharing resources. It was basically formalizing what I had done informally during the storm. The training sessions were actually interesting. I learned about emergency communication networks, triage procedures for cold weather injuries, and how to organize shelter operations. The county provided manuals and contact lists, and they set up a dedicated radio frequency for emergency volunteers. Tom got involved too, and we both became certified block captains for Meadowbrook Heights. Several other neighbors joined as well, creating a network of prepared households throughout the subdivision. The HOA officially endorsed the program, which felt like a small victory. In June, the local newspaper did a feature article on community preparedness, using our neighborhood as a case study. The article mentioned the generator ban controversy and how it had nearly led to tragedy, though they were diplomatic about not calling out Deborah by name. Still, anyone who knew the story could read between the lines. The article got picked up by a few regional news outlets, and suddenly I was getting calls from HOA boards in other communities asking for advice on their own covenant policies. It was surreal. I never set out to become some kind of HOA reform activist, but apparently that was what had happened. Most of my advice was simple common sense. Do not ban things that are important for safety. Communicate clearly with homeowners. Do not let a few board members make major decisions without broader input. Listen when people raise legitimate concerns. It was not rocket science, but apparently it needed to be said. One call that stood out came from a woman in Rochester who was dealing with her HOA trying to ban home fire extinguishers because they supposedly created visual clutter if stored in garages. I told her to fight it tooth and nail and to document everything. I also gave her Patricia Reeves' contact information, since my lawyer had done such a good job helping me navigate my own situation. A few months later, the woman called back to tell me they had won. The HOA backed down after she threatened to go public with the story, and they actually ended up revising their entire covenant amendment process to include homeowner input. Small victories, but they added up. By the time the second anniversary of the blizzard rolled around, Meadowbrook Heights was a completely different place. The HOA was functioning smoothly under Tom's leadership. The Emergency Preparedness Committee had organized several successful community events. Multiple families had installed generators, and the neighborhood had a real plan for dealing with future disasters. And most importantly, people looked out for each other. That sense of community that had emerged during the crisis had stuck around. Neighbors helped neighbors with yard work, snow removal, and general life stuff. Block parties became regular occurrences. Kids played together in yards up and down the streets. It was what a neighborhood was supposed to be. On December 12th, 2 years after the storm, the Emergency Preparedness Committee organized a community gathering at the neighborhood park. It was billed as a preparedness fair, with information booths about emergency supplies, first aid training, and backup power options. But it was also a chance to remember what we had all been through and to celebrate how far we had come. I set up a booth demonstrating different types of generators and answering questions about installation and maintenance. Rachel helped, keeping things organized and charming everyone who stopped by. Murphy, wearing a vest that identified him as a disaster preparedness dog, mostly just enjoyed the attention and the treats people kept sneaking him. The turnout was impressive. Easily 2/3 of the neighborhood showed up at some point during the afternoon. People brought food to share, and someone set up a sound system playing music. Kids ran around burning off energy while adults talked and laughed. Toward the end of the event, Tom got up to say a few words. He thanked everyone for coming and for making the neighborhood such a great place to live. He talked about the importance of being prepared, but also the importance of community. And then he asked me to come up and say something. I really did not want to, but Rachel gave me a pointed look and Murphy wagged his tail encouragingly, so I made my way to the front. I'm not much for speeches, I started, which got a few laughs. But I wanted to say that 2 years ago we went through something that could have torn this neighborhood apart. Instead, it brought us together. That's not because of anything I did. That's because when things got bad, people stepped up. They helped each other. They looked out for each other. And that's what we need to keep doing. I paused, looking out at the familiar faces. The generator ban was stupid, and fighting it was frustrating, but it taught me something important. A neighborhood isn't just houses and lawns and HOA rules. It's people. And when people work together and support each other, they can handle just about anything. More applause, and I quickly stepped down before anyone could ask me to continue. Tom took over again, wrapping things up and reminding people about the next HOA meeting. As the crowd dispersed, Deborah approached me. I had seen her earlier, lingering at the edges of the gathering, but this was the first time we had spoken in months. "That was a good speech," she said quietly. "Thanks. I wanted you to know that I've been doing some work with the County Emergency Management Office, helping them develop guidelines for HOAs on emergency preparedness policies." She looked uncomfortable but determined to get the words out. "They're going to recommend that communities prohibit any covenant restrictions that interfere with emergency backup power systems." "That's good," I said, meaning it. "It should have been obvious from the start. I was wrong to push for that ban, wrong about a lot of things." She met my eyes. "I know I apologized before, but I don't think I really understood what I was apologizing for until I started working on these guidelines and saw how many communities have similar problems. People could have died because of my ego. But they didn't," I pointed out. "And you've been working to make sure it doesn't happen elsewhere. That counts for something." "I'm not looking for forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I learned from what happened. I'm trying to do better." "Then we're good." I offered my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. She left shortly after, and Rachel came up and slipped her arm through mine. "That looked like it went well." "Yeah, I think it did. You're a good person, Harrison Young. Have I mentioned that lately?" "You might have said something along those lines once or twice." I kissed the top of her head. "Come on, let's get Murphy home before he eats any more cookies." The years that followed were blissfully uneventful, at least in terms of HOA drama. We had a few more significant winter storms, but the neighborhood was always ready. Generators hummed to life when the power went out. Block captains checked on elderly residents. People opened their homes to neighbors who needed help. Tom served 2 terms as HOA president before passing the torch to Mrs. Chen, who proved to be even more efficient and organized than he had been. The Emergency Preparedness Committee became a permanent fixture, with new volunteers rotating through every year. My furniture business continued to grow, and eventually I hired an assistant to help with the increased workload. Rachel and I got married in a small ceremony at a local park, with Murphy serving as the ring bearer, a role he took very seriously. The generator stayed in my garage, a silent guardian against the unpredictable Western New York weather. I tested it regularly, changed the oil on schedule, and kept extra fuel on hand. It had become such a normal part of my routine that I barely thought about the fight that had once surrounded it. Sometimes, though, when I was out in the garage working on a project or maintaining equipment, I would remember that October day when Deborah showed up with her manila folder and her condescending smile. I would think about how close things had come to disaster, and how something as simple as being prepared had made all the difference, and I would be grateful that I had been stubborn enough to fight back when it mattered, because at the end of the day, that was what made a community strong. Not perfect adherence to rules or immaculate lawns or uniform mailbox heights. It was people who were willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. People who prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. People who took care of each other when times got hard. That was what turned a subdivision into a neighborhood, and a neighborhood into a home. The generator hummed softly in the background as I worked, ready for whatever storms might come. And I knew that when they did, we would face them together, as a community should.